The noise that controls. You let me ask you something. When was the last time you were truly silent? Not just quiet because your phone died, not just silent because you were out of things to say, but intentionally still, deliberately calm, fully present. The truth is, most people today don't remember because silence has become a rare art in a world addicted to noise. We wake up and scroll. We hear an opinion and feel the need to respond. We see someone post something ridiculous and we have to clap back. We text, we tweet, we talk, we react. And we call this communication. But is it, or is it just a distraction from ourselves? Look around you. Modern life has trained us to stay externally loud and internally hollow. We're constantly plugged in, yet deeply disconnected. We hear everything, but understand nothing. We speak first and reflect later, if at all. We've confused reaction with power, but reacting isn't strength. It's the opposite. Reacting is what happens when you're not in control, when the world pushes your buttons and you respond like a machine. It's automatic, it's predictable, and it's dangerous. Because every time you react without awareness, you hand your peace, your power, to someone else. And here's the hard truth. The more reactive you are, the less free you become. You think you're expressing yourself, but really you're being controlled by headlines, by trolls, by people who know exactly what words will make you explode. You're not a sovereign being. You're an emotional puppet. Marcus Aurelius said, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment." Translation: silence is power, because silence is a choice. It's the space between impulse and action, between what you feel like doing and what you choose to do. It's where your freedom lives. Now ask yourself honestly, do you speak just to feel relevant? Do you post to feel seen? Do you argue because silence feels too powerless? And if so, who's really in control? Let me share a simple example. A public figure I once followed, calm, collected, deeply respected, was accused, mocked, and dragged across the internet. Everyone waited for a response. And he said nothing. No tweet, no defense, no meltdown. Just silence. Weeks passed. The noise died down, and the truth came out. Not from him, but from the facts. People respected him even more. Not because he won the argument, but because he refused to be dragged into it. That's real power. In a world full of noise, the one who stays silent becomes magnetic. The one who doesn't react becomes mysterious, grounded, unshakable. You don't need to prove yourself to people who misunderstand you. You don't need to fight every battle that invites you. And you definitely don't need to chase every insult like a dog chasing a car. You're not here to be loud. You're here to be clear. Because over time, silence doesn't just protect your peace, duck. It sharpens your mind. It deepens your presence. It reclaims your emotional freedom. And the less you react, the more you begin to lead. Not with noise, but with presence, with stillness, with substance. So the next time the world pulls you into its chaos, remember this. You don't need to clap back. You need to breathe, to watch, to be. Because silence isn't weakness. It's wisdom in action. And sometimes the most powerful statement you'll ever make is the one you don't say. The Stoic meaning of silence. Let's talk about silence, not as the absence of sound, but as a form of power, not as weakness, not as suppression, but as a sign of mastery. Because here's what most people get wrong. They think being silent means you're holding back, that you're afraid, that you have nothing to say. But Stoic wisdom shows us something different. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You always own the option of having no opinion." Think about that. You don't owe the world a reaction. You don't owe every topic a take. You don't owe every insult an answer. You own the option of having no opinion. And that's not avoidance. It's sovereignty. See, we live in a time where speaking out is praised as strength. Everyone wants to say their truth, clap back, speak up, make noise. But let me ask you something. If everyone is shouting and no one is thinking, who's really in control? Here's what the Stoics understood. Just because you feel something doesn't mean you have to act on it. Just because you're provoked doesn't mean you need to explode. Just because someone wants a reaction doesn't mean they deserve one. Epictetus said, "Any person capable of angering you becomes your master, because they control your mood, your words, your peace. And true mastery begins the moment you stop giving people that control." Silence in this sense isn't repression, it's awareness. It's the conscious decision to observe before you engage, to notice your emotion without becoming your emotion. Let me say that again. To notice your emotion without becoming your emotion. You're not bottling things up. You're not suppressing truth. You're simply creating space between what you feel and how you choose to respond. And that space is everything. Because in that space lives clarity, and in clarity you find your power. Let me give you a real-world example. Imagine someone insults you online. They twist your words, call you names. They want to pull you into their chaos. Most people respond immediately. Fire back with anger, try to prove a point. But what if you didn't? What if you sat with it, without reacting? Not because you're afraid, but because you've outgrown the need to defend your ego. Over time, that silence speaks louder than any comeback, because it says, "I am not owned by your noise. I choose my response. I protect my energy." That's stoicism in action. It's not cold. It's not distant. It's mature. It's grounded. It's strength with stillness. So let me ask you, when was the last time your silence made you stronger? When was the last time you paused before replying and felt your power return? You see, real silence, the kind the Stoics talked about, isn't passive. It's not you hiding in the corner, avoiding life. It's you standing still in the storm, with eyes open, heart steady, and mind sharp. It's you mastering yourself so no one else gets to. Because here's the quiet truth the world rarely tells you. The loudest person in the room is usually the most reactive. The one who needs to be seen often fears being ignored. The one who speaks on everything rarely understands anything. But the person who governs themselves, they don't need to say much because their presence speaks for them. They walk into a room and shift the energy, not by volume, but by depth. They listen more than they speak. They pause more than they push. And they only offer words that are worth the breath. So the next time you feel provoked, pause. The next time you feel pressured to comment, to argue, to explain, breathe. And remember, silence isn't retreat. It's alignment. It's restraint. It's wisdom. You don't need to be the loudest voice to be the strongest presence. You don't need to fight every battle to win the war within. And you definitely don't need to react just because someone wants your attention. Because the moment you choose silence, you choose yourself. Psychology of silence. Why it works. Let's talk science for a moment. Have you ever wondered why some people can sit in the middle of chaos and still look unshaken? Why some individuals, in arguments, interviews, even in personal attacks, respond with nothing but calm, steady silence? Here's the reason. It's not just discipline, it's neuroscience. In emotionally intense moments, when someone insults you, criticizes you, disrespects you, your brain flips a switch. Specifically, your limbic system takes over. That's the part of your brain responsible for fight, flight, or freeze. It's fast, emotional, and reactive. And while it might help you survive a wild animal in the jungle, it rarely helps you win a verbal war in real life. Because the moment you react impulsively, you're no longer leading. You're being led by your biology. You say what you didn't mean. You send the text you'll regret. You give away your peace, your power, your poise, all in a split-second decision made by your inner panic. Now here's where silence comes in. Silence is not about being passive. It's about creating space, a response gap, between what just happened and what you choose to do next. That gap is everything. It's where clarity breathes. It's where self-respect is preserved. It's where transformation begins. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, once said, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." That's exactly what silence gives you. And most people never tap into it because they confuse silence with weakness. They think if they don't fire back immediately, they've lost. But that's not strength. That's insecurity dressed up as dominance. Let me give you an example. Have you ever watched a skilled negotiator in action? They don't rush. They don't fill the room with noise. They let the other party speak. They pause. They observe. And in that silence, they see more. They hear not just words, but intent. And then, only when necessary, they speak with precision. That's power. It's the same with wise leaders, the ones we remember. They're not the loudest in the room. They're the most composed. They're the ones who listen more than they speak, the ones who can take a verbal attack and not flinch. Not because they don't feel, but because they've trained themselves to pause. Because silence isn't shutdown, it's strategy. Let me be clear. I'm not talking about emotional avoidance. I'm not saying you should bottle up your truth or pretend things don't hurt. What I'm saying is this. You don't need to respond to every jab. You don't need to defend your name every time it's mentioned. You don't need to break your peace to prove your point. Sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. Because silence doesn't mean you've given up the fight. It means you've chosen not to fight on their terms. Think about it. When someone lashes out at you and you don't react, what happens? They lose momentum. They become confused. They reveal more than they intended. Why? Because silence is a mirror. It reflects the other person's energy back at them without your interference. And in that mirror, they are forced to confront themselves. Now here's a tough love reminder. If you're someone who reacts to every small thing, you're leaking your power in every direction. You're not being strong. You're being emotionally hijacked. But if you can learn to pause, even just for 5 seconds, you become untouchable. You shift from being reactive to being intentional. From emotional chaos to quiet strength. From noise to knowing. So next time your buttons are pushed, pause, breathe, step back, say nothing. Let the storm pass. Let the emotions settle. Let your higher self respond, not your wounded pride. Because in the end, true strength isn't measured by how loudly you speak, but by how clearly you think before you speak. And sometimes the clearest voice is the one that simply doesn't need to shout. When you say less, you command more. Let me ask you something. When was the last time your silence made people lean in? Not because you were afraid, not because you didn't know what to say, but because you chose not to speak because you didn't need to. In today's world where everyone seems desperate to be heard, there's something undeniably powerful about the person who doesn't always speak, the person who listens longer, who observes more, who only speaks when it matters. There's a quiet strength in that, and people can feel it without a single word. We live in a culture obsessed with saying more opinions, more updates, more defending, explaining, justifying. But what if real influence isn't about saying more, it's about saying less, but with clarity, intention, and weight? You see, there's a Stoic principle most people forget. The warrior does not unsheath his sword for every insult. Let that sink in. Imagine a real warrior, trained, focused, calm. Do you think he runs into every petty conflict, flailing his sword just to prove he's strong? Number, he keeps it sheathed. He picks his battles because he knows the truth. Power doesn't shout, it chooses. Insecure people speak to be validated. They argue to be seen. They explain themselves endlessly, hoping someone out there will finally understand them. But the stronger you become inside, the less explaining you need to do. Because truth doesn't need defending. And your worth? It's not up for public debate. Think about the people you respect the most. Mentors, leaders, maybe even a wise old grandparent. Do they speak all the time? Or do they pause, think, and speak only when they have something real to say? Their silence doesn't make them weak. It makes them magnetic. Because when they finally speak, you listen. You trust it means something. That's the paradox of power. The less you say, the more people listen. Now here's the truth most people miss. Every time you speak from a place of insecurity, every time you argue to prove yourself, every time you explain what doesn't need explaining, you're shrinking your presence. You're leaking energy. You're turning your voice into noise. But when you reclaim that energy, when you speak only from truth, not ego, you rise, and others feel it. So let's make it personal. When was the last time you chose silence? Not because you were afraid, but because you were grounded? Not because you didn't have a comeback, but because you didn't need one? That kind of silence is not fear. It's mastery. It says, I'm not here to perform. I'm not here to react. I'm here to lead with presence, not noise. Because ultimately, your voice is most powerful when it's not trying to prove anything. So the next time you're tempted to reply, to explain, to defend, pause, breathe, and ask yourself, does this serve my truth or just my ego? You might be surprised by what happens when you say less, yes, but mean more. Practical Stoic tools. How to practice strategic silence. Let's get honest for a moment. Silence sounds powerful in theory, but in practice, it's uncomfortable, awkward, even frustrating, because we've been conditioned to believe that silence means weakness, that if we don't speak, we're losing, that if we don't respond, we're being disrespected. But here's the truth the Stoics knew and practiced. Silence is a muscle, and like any muscle, it must be trained. So if you're serious about developing emotional strength and clarity, let me walk you through 4 Stoic practices that turn silence from a concept into a daily discipline. Exercise 1, the 3-second power pause. Here's the first practice. It's deceptively simple, but life-changing. Pause for 3 seconds before responding to anything emotional. That's it. Someone says something passive-aggressive? Pause. You get an angry text? Pause. You feel that familiar urge to fire back? Pause. 3 seconds might feel like nothing, but in emotional time, it's eternity. In those 3 seconds, you're not just buying time, you're reclaiming control. You move from automatic reaction to conscious response. And most importantly, you stay rooted in yourself. As Viktor Frankl once said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose. That space is silence, and it's yours to protect. Exercise 2. Choose silence over noise. Let's be honest. How many times have you jumped into a pointless online argument just to prove a point? How often do you explain yourself to people who aren't even trying to understand you? The second exercise is this. Consciously choose silence in situations where your voice won't add value, only volume. That includes online debates with strangers, petty workplace gossip, passive-aggressive jabs from insecure people. Here's a question to ask yourself in those moments. Will my words create clarity or just more chaos? If the answer is chaos, choose silence. Because maturity isn't about being silent all the time. It's about knowing when to speak and why. Exercise 3. Observe your inner dialogue. This third practice is where silence becomes inner work. Next time you choose silence, don't just grit your teeth and suppress your emotions. Observe them. When you don't say that thing you wanted to say, what happens inside you? Is it anger, resentment, a need to be heard, a fear of being misunderstood? Get curious, because silence isn't suppression, it's observation. It's the practice of seeing your reactions clearly without becoming them. This is how the Stoics train themselves. Don't explain your philosophy, embody it. Epictetus. That embodiment starts with self-awareness, and self-awareness starts with silence. Exercise 4. Journal the shift. Finally, once you've practiced silence in a real-life situation, journal what shifted. Did the problem resolve itself? Did you feel more peaceful after staying silent? Or did something uncomfortable rise up and teach you something deeper about yourself? Journaling turns silence into growth. It transforms passive restraint into active insight. This is where silence becomes transformation, not just avoidance. And here's something most people never realize. Not everyone deserves your explanation. Your peace isn't up for public negotiation. Your boundaries don't require a debate. And your growth doesn't need to be broadcast to earn approval. Final reflection. Strategic silence is not just about what you don't say. It's about what you do with the space in between. Every moment you pause, every time you choose not to engage, every word you withhold out of wisdom rather than fear, you're building something most people will never understand: emotional sovereignty. So let me ask you, when was the last time silence made you stronger, not smaller? When was the last time you sat with your feelings instead of unleashing them? Because silence isn't the absence of strength. It's the training ground for it. And the more you practice it, strategically, intentionally, and calmly, the more unshakable you become. Not louder, just deeper. Final awakening. Let your silence speak for you. Let me paint you a picture. A man stands in a crowded room. People are talking about him. Assumptions, rumors, criticisms flying like arrows. He hears every word. He sees every glance, but his eyes stay calm, his breath steady, and he says nothing. Not out of fear, not because he's powerless, but because he's chosen not to dance in the chaos. That's not silence from weakness. That's silence from wisdom. You see, most people think silence means defeat, that if you don't respond, you're letting others win, that if you don't defend yourself, you must have no backbone. But here's the truth. Silence is not the absence of power. It is the presence of self-control. The strongest people in the room are rarely the loudest. They're the ones who don't need to explain their worth. They don't need to clap back. They don't need to be understood. They need to be centered. Let that sink in. You don't need to be understood. You need to be at peace with yourself. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." Think about that. He didn't say fight back. He didn't say prove them wrong. He said be different, be better, be still. Because real power doesn't rush, real confidence doesn't shout, and real self-respect doesn't chase validation. Here's what most people never realize. When you respond with silence, you're not being passive. You're choosing your battlefield. You're preserving your energy. You're protecting your soul. You don't need to speak to be heard. Sometimes the most impactful message you'll ever send is the one wrapped in stillness, because the world is always watching, not what you say, but how you carry yourself when the noise gets loud. So let me ask you something. Can you go one full day only speaking when it truly matters? Not reacting to nonsense, not defending your ego, not chasing approval, just watching, breathing, choosing. Try it. You might be surprised by how much power lives in that pause, how much clarity emerges in the quiet, how much peace returns when you stop trying to be seen and start trying to be still. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more presence, more grounded people who don't flinch when provoked, more stillness in a storm of opinions. Let your silence speak. Let it echo your discipline. Let it reveal the emotional maturity you've worked so hard to build. Because in the end, you don't rise by shouting louder. You rise by standing taller, still, calm, unshakable. And the ones who know will understand you without a word. Today, speak less. Choose your words like currency. Let your silence be your signature. And remember, in a world that screams for attention, stillness is a revolution. Let silence be your legacy. So let's bring it all together. Silence isn't weakness, it's not avoidance, and it's definitely not passivity. It is presence, it is power, it is the highest expression of emotional self-control. Because the moment you stop reacting to everything, you start leading something greater, yourself. The moment you stop explaining who you are, you start embodying what you are, strong, clear, grounded. You no longer need to fight every battle to prove your worth. You no longer need to chase understanding from people who never truly listened. You no longer need to throw your energy at every insult, every opinion, every noise, because your peace is not up for auction. Silence becomes the armor you don't have to wear, because nothing can pierce you anymore. It's the choice to pause before speaking, to breathe before reacting, to watch without needing to perform. And that stillness, that calm you cultivate on the inside, it becomes your message, louder than words, more commanding than arguments, more respected than noise. As Marcus Aurelius said, you always own the option of having no opinion. Things are not asking to be judged by you. Leave them alone. In other words, you don't need to weigh in. You don't need to defend. You just need to be anchored, centered, and unshaken. Let your silence be the final word, not because you're afraid to speak, but because you've evolved past the need to shout. Over time, silence doesn't just change how people see you. It changes how you see yourself. Clearer, lighter, stronger. So let this be your reminder. You don't need to win every argument. You don't need to be louder to be heard. You don't need to react to prove you're alive. You only need to return to yourself, to the still, grounded version of you who knows. Sometimes the most powerful thing you'll ever say is nothing at all.